Let's look at the chapter on inclusive leadership in Peter Northhouse's Leadership Theory and Practice. So let's start off with a description of what is inclusive leadership. This is a little different than some of the other chapters that we've looked at, in that inclusive leadership isn't a complete, well-developed theory. Rather, it's more of the application of many leadership theories to contemporary contexts that we often find ourselves in now, where there are multiple ethnicities and races living together, where there's multiple identities, where people can visibly separate themselves into different groups. And this mixing of cultures and ethnicities has led to a need for what's known as diversity management. Now, this is when we talk about inclusion, that's part of what is included in the expression DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. But inclusion is the non-controversial part about DEI. There's a lot of issues that can cause divisions concerning the concepts of diversity and equity because they mean different things to different people. But everybody agrees that inclusion is super important in an organization. For the organization to function well, people need to feel included. So what is inclusion? Inclusion, it's a feeling. It's something that's inside of you. It's a subjective state that one experiences. It's a feeling that one is part of a group. In an organizational context, this means like people feel like they're in the same work group as with the people that they work with closely. And this feeling of inclusion, people are going to experience it differently. Some people have a strong need for inclusion. They need lots of evidence that they're included in the group. Other people don't care too much about that, but everybody has this need to some degree or another, even if it's really weak. Now, when we talk about inclusion, we talk about inclusion in a group, but often it's determined by the closeness between a leader and a follower. You look at that relationship. So it's very relational, looking at the relationship between whoever's leading the group and each of the followers in the group. And in this way, you might be thinking, oh, this sounds a lot like leader-member exchange, LMX, another theory that's really important. And it is very similar to LMX, leader-member exchange. And this idea of inclusive leadership has lots of things in common with other leadership theories that emphasize the importance of the relationship. One of the ideas lying behind inclusive leadership is what's known as optimal distinctiveness theory. And in optimal distinctiveness theory, people have this need inside, this need to balance two things. First, the need to for being in a group. The idea of like, I belong in here. I'm like the other people. We're together. This is kind of like the idea we need to be similar to other people and know that we're doing okay and that we're part of a group and that they feel like we're part of them. But also, people feel the need to be different from others. And that's described as distinctiveness from others. And these two things need to be present. People need to feel like they're part of a group, but also that they're special and have something unique to contribute to the group or to contribute to other people outside of the group. And so the optimal distinctiveness theory means that, hey, both of these needs need to be met. So one way of describing or defining inclusion in an organizational context is this a definition by Marilyn Brewer. The degree to which an employee perceives, so it's something that the employee perceives, something that they take in and feel, that he or she is an esteemed member of the work group, like they're valued, they're important, they're part of the group, through experiencing treatment, that is the way that people behave towards them, that satisfies his or her needs for belongingness and uniqueness. So if people treat you like, oh yeah, you're part of this group and you have something unique and special and important to contribute, you're going to feel included in the group. So that's kind of an idea, a way of understanding what it means to feel included in a group. Now, Dr. Northouse presents a model of inclusive leadership that's kind of at the center of this chapter. And it's basically a way of understanding what inclusive leadership is and what we know about it. And like most psychological phenomena, most phenomena that occurs in people's heads, one really good way of understanding it is first to define what we're talking about, the inclusive leadership, and what behaviors are involved in inclusive leadership. And then look at, well, what are the antecedents? What contributes to these behaviors? What makes these behaviors more likely? So those are the antecedent conditions. And then the third thing is the outcome. What's the result of inclusive leadership? And what do we know follows when leaders are doing the behaviors associated with inclusive leadership? So we're going to look at these things one at a time. Now let's start off with the antecedent conditions of inclusive leadership. First of all, there's the leader themselves. There's some characteristics of the leader that will make inclusive leadership more likely to happen. One is pro-diversity beliefs, meaning that the idea that if there's more diversity, that will help the organization. Now that depends on the individual, but it also depends on the context and one's position and what one's role is in an organization. Take, for example, your favorite sports team. Now, from the coach's point of view, diversity might not be that important in choosing players. What's really important is to get the very best players possible, regardless of what their demographic identity is, to win the most games, because that's what coaches are supposed to do. But now, if you're the owner of the team, diversity might be more important because you can think, oh, wow, we can increase the appeal of our team and we can get a larger audience. And there's a lot of advantages to having a demographically diverse team. So the owner might naturally have pro-diversity beliefs, and it might be harder for the coach to have pro-diversity beliefs. And so it depends a lot on what a group is trying to do, how easy these pro-diversity beliefs are. A second characteristic of leaders that'll make them more likely to be inclusive leaders is what's called a boundary spanning mindset. If a leader has this type of mindset, they can not only see what they believe to be true, but also what other people's points of view are, even if they totally disagree with them. For example, think of a political party that you don't like. Can you understand their point of view without attributing bad motives to them? If you can, you probably have a boundary spanning mindset. That doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but you can at least understand their point of view without thinking that they're doing something for some evil reason, because in their mind, they are not doing something for an evil reason. They're doing it because they think that something is genuinely good. Another characteristic of leaders who are more likely to be inclusive is cognitive complexity. And that's the idea, it's similar to boundary spanning mindset, but the idea of being able to see a problem from a different points of view, not just focusing on what you already know to be true, but looking at from a different perspective, be able to get a different perspective on an approach to a problem. Personality can also play an important role. Leaders who are high in the trait of agreeableness and openness to experience, openness to new ideas, are more likely to be inclusive in their leadership style than people who are disagreeable or who are not open to new ideas normally. And then a final leader characteristic is awareness of self-bias and blind spots. This idea that, okay, I look at what I believe and I know that I'm biased towards certain ideas because I've already decided that they're true, or if I've experienced them in such and such a way in my life, and that I am naturally going to lean to things that are the most congruent or traditional with what I already believe. And similarly, I have blind spots. There's lots of stuff that I don't know. But the problem with the stuff that you don't know is that normally you don't know what you don't know. And it's only with interacting with others that you can become aware of the things that you don't know. And it's easy to deny that we don't know something. But we need to do that because we really aren't that intelligent and bright. So those are the leader characteristics that that make inclusive leadership more likely. There's also group diversity cognitions, thoughts and beliefs about groups and diversity. One of them is multiculturalism. If you've lived in different cultures and you've experienced different cultures, if you can change your behavior to act appropriately in different cultures, the idea of inclusive leadership comes a lot easier. I lived in France for 17 years, and the French are very different than Americans, and I had to learn to act more French when I was with the French and to act more American when I was with Americans. Otherwise, you can really mess things up and offend people and miscommunicate, and it's really hard. And I definitely didn't get things down 100%, but hopefully I did a good enough job. And then also there's the climate for diversity and inclusion. Does the organization encourage diversity? Is it encouraging inclusion? Does it have policies that support these things to make people feel part of the group? And so those are some of the antecedents of inclusive leadership. Now, what actually constitutes inclusive leadership? So let's look at some of these behaviors. One of the big consequences, this is like one of the main consequences, and why people are so sold on it, is it creates an atmosphere of psychological safety. Psychological safety is this idea that you can express your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors to people in the group, or specifically to a leader, without fear of consequences. You don't have to pretend that you don't think something or pretend that you don't know something. You can be yourself, and when you have something to contribute, you can feel like you can contribute without being yelled at or bawled out or suffering negative consequences. That's what psychological safety is. And people function a lot better when there's psychological safety, when they don't have to worry about, what's the boss's reaction going to be? Another aspect of inclusive leadership is that it encourages divergent viewpoints. This is specifically in the context of problem solving. When we're problem solving, we usually don't want just this top-down approach like this. Okay, this is how the boss says we have to solve this problem. Let's do it. Because there might be better ways to solve it, or to solve it more completely, or to solve it cheaper. So an inclusive leader will look for different divergent viewpoints from people in the group to help find the best solution. Doesn't mean that the divergent viewpoints are going to be better than the idea that the boss has, but there's a good chance that at least some will occasionally be better, and that allows the group to function better. So similarly, an inclusive leader will appreciate all views and contributions. So people that bring in a different perspective are appreciated, and their contribution, both to problem solving and to completion of the task, is appreciated. Another characteristic of an inclusive leader is that they are available and accessible. You don't have to look for that magic moment to be able to speak to your supervisor, but they're generally available for hearing ideas. That makes people feel a lot more included. The inclusive leader will invite input from others. They're open. They're going to say, "Hey, I want to find out what you're thinking about this, or what is your take on this problem." They invite input from others. Inclusive leaders also put a big emphasis on organizational justice. Organizational justice is this perception that we're being treated fair in organizations. And if you ever take a class in organizational behavior, that's like a big theme of organizational behavior, is this idea of organizational justice and all the good things that occur when people think that they're being treated fairly. But when people think that they're not being treated fairly, when there's low organizational justice, there's a lot of bad things that happen too. The inclusive leadership is going to share decision making. They're not going to control all the decisions, but they're going to empower people according to their abilities on different things to give them as much freedom as is appropriate that they can handle. And they'll rather than micromanaging, they'll want to let people do things their own way. The inclusive leader creates genuine connections with others. He's got a good relationship with his or her employees, but also encourages good relationships between the employees. Then also the inclusive leader is going to see what's going bad and what's not contributing to inclusion, and they're going to assess and then challenge and change practices that don't make people feel included. So if there's something that makes people feel bad or makes some group feel left out, the inclusive leader is going to say, "Hey, we're not going to do this. We're going to do something else where everybody can be included." And the inclusive leader solicits different perspectives and incorporates those into the work. They're not just listening to different perspectives, but they're looking for the very best ones and tries to take everybody's point of view into consideration to find the optimal solution for the group to do the task that they're assigned. So those are the behaviors that characterize inclusive leadership. Now, what are the consequences of inclusive leadership? Well, like we said, the first one is psychological safety. People are going to feel like, yeah, this is a place where I can make a contribution and it's not dangerous. Work engagement also occurs. Work engagement is how much somebody's willing to pour themselves into work. It's very similar to the idea of fun. People are going to have a lot more fun at work when they feel like they're part of the group than when they don't. Psychological empowerment, this idea that, hey, I can make a difference, I can change things, I can help make this place better. Positive employee attitudes like commitment to their organization and the low turnover intentions and just positive attitudes towards coworkers. All these things happen when there's more inclusive leadership. People are just, their well-being increases when they feel that they're part of what's going on. Studies have also shown that people are more creative and innovative when there's psychological safety, and that people are looking for better solutions. Yeah, I can be really creative when people are looking for better solutions. The typical person will feel. There's also more helping behavior or organizational citizenship behaviors when people feel included. It's like, hey, this is my group. I want to do something good for it. Another real positive consequence of inclusive leadership is that the group learns from errors and failures, and they can get better at what they're doing when they're listening to everybody and everybody feels like they're a part of the group. And because of that, the work group performance level goes up. When people don't feel included in the group, the work performance of the team as a whole tends to go down. So there are a lot of positive outcomes to inclusive leadership. So why does inclusive leadership work? What's the underlying mechanisms that's going on? A good part of it is a sense of shared identity. It's like, hey, this group is my group. This is who I am. I want to be successful. I want this group to be successful. And it reduces status differences based on demographics. Our identity is with the group, not with our demographics. And it values the participation of everybody in it, not just so that they do the minimal that they're required, but that they can bring everything that they are into the group to contribute to the group's well-being. So, what are the strengths of this theory or this approach to leadership or this emphasis on leadership? Inclusive leadership creates involvement and engagement. It gets people working. It's also very consistent with relational leadership theories like LMX and transformational leadership, all these theories that have emphasized something to have to do with relationship. That's pretty much the focus of inclusive leadership. And then the greatest strength is it works. There are better organizational outcomes when people feel included. A leader is supposed to help the group achieve the group and organizational goals, and making sure everybody feels included really works. Well, how about the weaknesses of this? Well, first of all, it's not really a distinct theory. I don't know, perhaps in 10 or 20 years it'll evolve into a theory. But right now it's more like a set of principles that we know work, and therefore it's really important because that's important in contemporary contexts. Another weakness is inclusive leadership is difficult to measure, because you got to look at the individual relationship that the supervisor has with each one of the employees, and whenever you're measuring multiple relationships, it gets difficult. It can distract from the mission or organization, the mission of the organization or the group. If there's too much of an emphasis on everybody feeling included and part of the group and having these positive feelings about being in the group, it can sometimes be a distraction. I would say that's not the usual thing that happens, but it's possible. Another weakness is if there's an overemphasis on empowering people beyond what they're capable of, that can be destructive to the group. If somebody's put in charge of stuff that they don't know how to, that they don't have the background necessary to run, to do, to make good decisions about, that can be destructive if people are overly empowered beyond what they're capable of doing. And then sometimes it downplays cultural differences, and it can downplay organizational culture and the need to fit into the existing or understand the existing organizational culture and the need for organizational culture fit. But in general, the weaknesses are pretty minor compared to the benefits of making sure that everybody feels included when you're leading a group. As I often do in these videos, I'd like to just kind of mention a couple Christian applications, because that's what my values are. I'm a Christ follower, and I know that some of you are too. Inclusive leadership fits in really well to a Christian framework of behavior. The summary of Jesus's ethics is love one another as I have loved you. Jesus said that numerous times in the Gospels, and the idea of loving involves including the person in whatever group that we're involved in. And then in the verse after this, in the Gospel of John, Jesus said, greater love has no one than this, has no one than to lay down his life for his friends. So Jesus calls us to a life of loving others, even to the point of laying down our life for the benefit of others. If we're called to lay down our life for others, we can at least make the effort necessary to bring people into the group, to understand them, to ask to understand their point of view, to truly understand it, and to find a solution that best incorporates everybody's interests and concerns. So inclusive leadership fits in really well with Christian values.